Welcome back. Today we're going to be teaching about the New Testament, and we're going to be breaking these down into individual letters. And these individual letters, we're going to discuss who wrote the letter, the year the letter was written, the culture that the letter was written to,
I like this.
and the topic of the letter. I found this stick outside to be my pointer. And I'm going to have Jessica actually do the honors of separating the New
Yes,
Testament
because I was taught how to separate them.
into letters. And look, if you spent your whole life getting a doctorate and studying theology, or
Matthew.
you spent your whole life, reading other people's interpretations of the Bible, and this isn't for you.
Oh, goodness.
You're not going to like what we're doing with this. But what I'm doing with this is I'm helping people who are new to their belief system, or people that are questioning stuff that's going on now in Christianity and saying, where have we gotten off? And giving them a guide to be able to view the Bible as individual letters, understand what those letters say, and then be able to interpret if what someone's teaching them is a false teaching or is a man-made doctrine, things of that nature, which will make them more confident in their own personal relationship with God.
Yeah.
And you'll see that this is the same practice that Jesus took. He came to set the captives free, those who were in prison, people who were bound by the law.
Yeah.
He came to set them free. So we're doing something good. And if you're religious and you hate this, sorry. Not sorry. All right.
Okay. This is Matthew through Jean.
All right. So first we have Matthew through John. These are known as the Gospels. These are Jesus' disciples' firsthand accounts of everything that Jesus did in his ministry, what they individually learned from him.
Yeah.
And this was really important because the life of Jesus needed to be confirmed 2, 3, 4 times to be validated. It couldn't just be like one of these other letters that were written by the apostles that don't have 2 or 3 confirmations, because the gospel was extremely important to the shape of everything that we teach about from here on.
Yeah.
So Jesus' disciples wrote the Gospels. Matthew wrote the book of Matthew. Mark wrote the book of Mark. Luke, John, etc. Those were the 4 disciples that were given the accounts of Jesus' life. They wrote these in around 70 to 90 AD.
That was what? Like
Jesus died around 33 AD.
40 to
So this is like 40 years after Jesus' death.
40 to 60 years. That's crazy.
A lot of people don't understand this. They think that like
They were writing as they were going.
They were writing as they were going or something. But I think so much was happening as they were going that they were just like taking it all in. You know?
Yeah. Could you imagine being with Jesus every day for 3 years?
Yeah. All the things that he did. Like, I mean, just one day he's like walking on water. Like, I probably would have just been in shock for, weeks. So these letters were written during Jesus to the area of Israel.
Yeah.
All of Jesus' ministry was in northern Israel, southern Israel, Jerusalem. And so you can see on the map here, there's Jerusalem. This is the Dead Sea. So most of Jesus' ministry, as far as from what I understand, was in Israel.
Yeah.
And the topic of the letter is the life of Jesus.
Yeah.
So this is the only accounts that we have of how Jesus was.
Yeah.
And that's pretty self-explanatory. It sums up what we need to talk about for the Gospels. Those are probably the most important books that I would recommend.
For someone to start with.
Yeah, you got to really understand what Jesus stood for in the culture that he came into. And you have to understand what he came into. Like, he came into a very religious dominated culture by the Jewish people who had all kinds of traditions and things that they were doing. And you gain that knowledge through reading those books, and you get to see how he interacted with those people. He was oftentimes very like,
you go celebrate your festivities.
Sarcastic, or he was just like, he did stuff that most people wouldn't be like, oh, that's Jesus, like flipping over all the tables in the temple.
I can't even remember how they used to preach that one. Good Lord. Keep going.
Yeah, they don't talk about the times when Jesus got rowdy, or he just ignored, like Jesus would just ignore people a lot. He just like, they would ask him a question and he would just like walk off.
Who do you say I am? Like, or turn it back on them.
Yeah. Or like Jesus was supposed to be showing up to some place on time, and people would be coming to him like, hey, like the festival that we're supposed to be going to starts today. Are you coming? And he was like, nah, I'll go whenever I feel like it.
Or like, Lazarus is dead.
He'd show up like 2 or 3 days later.
You're like,
Jesus was late a lot.
Oh God! See, I'm so like him.
Anyways, so you can, if you don't read those gospels through the lens of religion, you can see that Jesus was just a regular person.
Yeah.
With his divine leading of God's Spirit telling him what to do, and he was correcting religious people a lot, helping the impoverished people, healing those that were crippled and things of that nature. So
he's showing his heart, his nature. Yeah. Acts.
Yes. The book of Acts. So I didn't know this. The book of Acts was written by Luke.
I keep forgetting that. Every time you talk about it, I immediately think Paul wrote the book of Acts.
A lot of times people, they, say Paul wrote 2/3 of the letters in the New Testament.
So I just assume.
So you just assume it's all written by Paul. But Luke actually wrote this, which was one of Jesus' disciples.
The same one who wrote the Gospel of Luke, I'm assuming.
And this was the accounts of the early church. And it was written before the Gospels, I believe. It was written around 30 to 60 AD, from what they say.
Huh. That's so interesting how we just set things up.
You just assume a lot of stuff,
Yeah, well, yeah.
So the area that the book of Acts was written to was a large area. This one was more of a general letter, and it was just like a story of what happened at Pentecost, of what happened after Jesus' death, the instructions that they were, told to keep, and then what happened in the explosive growth of the early body of Christ. And them just trying to document what's going on, because a lot of crazy stuff started happening. And it was written to a lot of different areas. It was written to Israel, Turkey. So Israel, Turkey, Greece, Rome, I think Syria. So this was a vast area that it covered, and a lot of different ethnicity groups and people and cultures, but it was just an account. So it wasn't written directly to a certain person. It's just like, hey, this is what happened whenever Jesus was resurrected and the Spirit came, which was what was promised to us. So in the early church, what you need to understand in the book of Acts is that the Jewish culture was very heavy, and it hated Jesus and his disciples. And so those people were the ones that killed Jesus. The reason they did this was because Jesus went against every tradition that they had, every system, every religious.
The Jews, why they killed Jesus, you mean? Is that
what?
You said the reason why they killed him was because he went against everything?
Yeah. So Jesus went against everything that the Jewish people taught. And he also, the big thing was that he claimed to be the Messiah, and they did not believe that he was the Messiah.
Yeah, correct.
Because he didn't fit what their idea of the Messiah was going to be.
Yeah.
So this conflict continues with the massive explosive growth of the movement that the disciples began to initiate. And a lot of questions in the book of Acts were what we should expect, which is, with this new explosive growth, are we supposed to keep following the Jewish traditions?
Yeah. Pentecost is here.
Are we supposed to?
Okay, good.
Are we supposed to keep following the traditions of the Jews and mix that with the Spirit and what Jesus taught? And so a lot of those questions are answered in the book of Acts. And they're also there. You have to understand, in the book of Acts, they're growing from 12 disciples to, they added 3,000 men. That doesn't include women and children in a day. Then the next account was 5,000.
Oh my God.
They're growing rapidly. So
they're probably trying to, like, not control, but just like, what do we do with all this?
Trying to manage it's chaos. They're trying to figure out what to do. And so a lot of Acts' instructions about what they needed to do and what was going on. And
isn't it also the account of Paul when he, like, came to Christ?
Does the book of Acts talk about Paul?
I believe so. This is when Paul came into the picture. Like, he was there was a lot of martyrdom in Acts also. Like Stephen.
Mm-hmm. Stephen was the first martyr. That was in Acts.
Yeah, so they talked, I mean, I guess, like you're saying, it was just an account of, like, what was going on after Christ's death, like the coming to salvation, the people joining in, the martyrs. If I'm not mistaken, they talked about...
There's never been anything in history comparable to what happened in that chapter in the book of Acts. Okay.
Yeah.
It was wild.
Yeah. So Paul came into the picture during Acts, and so he was converted.
Yeah, Paul, who wrote a lot of the New Testament, was converted from Judaism. He was a Pharisee, and he was, like, trained by the highest Pharisee. So God made it a point to take someone who wasn't kind of rough like the disciples were and just an average person. He took someone that was of, like, great status, and blinded him for 3 days and transformed him. And then, actually, a lot of people don't know this. They think Paul was just blinded and then went straight into ministry. But Paul actually
he secluded himself or went
away for, like, years.
It was just him by himself.
Literally,
right?
Paul was by himself in later accounts, and says that Jesus taught Paul directly. So Paul didn't have...
That's in the Bible. Go read it.
Paul didn't have a Bible. He didn't have a teacher. He didn't have one of the disciples telling him what to do. And then he wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. We forget that, and we act like people, like, you got to read the Bible for God to teach you, and you got to be plugged into a church.
You got to have a leader.
You definitely got to be underneath leadership, or God won't teach you anything.
And you need to know which part of you in the fivefold ministry you are.
And I like to remind people, well, the guy that wrote the book that you guys are following, he learned everything directly from a man that was dead.
Eat that.
So anyways, that's enough talk about the book of Acts. We have a general understanding of that. Now let's talk about the next book of Romans. Okay. Romans was written by Paul. It was written in between 50 to 60 AD. And as you can guess, the book of Romans was written to
the Romans.
Rome.
Yeah, Rome.
The same place today where the Roman Colosseum, we just went and visited.
Oh, where they martyred people?
Yeah, that's the place where they killed the early Christians. It's where Nero was the
Yeah.
emperor.
Constantine's arch is there.
Yep. A lot of the infrastructure of the Roman Empire came from Rome.
Yeah.
So this letter was written to the Romans. So what you have to understand is that the capital of the Roman Empire, because the Roman influence, it spanned throughout all of these different countries: Greece, Turkey, Syria, Israel. The Romans were the primary government during that time. So this is the capital of the Roman Empire in Rome. And there was a heavy Jewish culture there because during the Roman times, the Romans upheld the physical law and having to do with like moral structure. And then the Jewish people held up God's law, and they worked together to keep a system of order and compliance. So this new thing starts like sparking off over here, where like 5,000 people come to this one area and begin listening to this one person talking. And the Jewish people and the Romans are like,
well, it's a threat.
They're like, what the fuck is going on? Like, how could this just like blow up so quick? So this is a huge threat to their empire, which the Romans did not like, and the Jewish people did not like, because it's pointing people away from religion and towards just having a personal relationship with God, where God can meet you in your house.
Yeah.
You don't need to come to the temple anymore. You don't need to make sacrifices. This is the stuff that's starting to unfold in the talk that's going around, and it's very much so a threat.
Do you feel like the Romans were more so upset because of how the Jews were handling this Christian explosion?
Yeah, so the Jews were actually, because there was such a heated controversy between the Jews and these new formed followers of Christ, that Emperor Claudius actually expelled the Jewish people from Rome.
Wow, yeah, it's crazy.
So what happened was the followers of Christ stayed behind, and they were able to stay in Rome, but the Jews were actually kicked out of Rome because they were causing such a turmoil.
You know what? That makes sense why Paul was able to go, because I think he was a Roman by birth, is what he said. Because if he expelled them, that's interesting.
Yeah. Paul knew them very well, and part of his culture in the Jewish culture was to live by the law. Well, the new culture of following Christ was to live by grace and by the Spirit.
Yeah.
And by faith in things that you couldn't see. It became spiritual as opposed to being physical.
There's something in here that I don't know if you want to delve into this about respecting governmental authorities. Could you explain why he was talking about that?
Yeah, so a lot of times people take Romans 13 out of context, like I talked about, and they preach it as something that fits the mold of today, where people will say that you need to submit to all governing authorities and you need to respect them, and you need to understand that God has appointed those people and it's for his purposes and all this kind of stuff. But what they're not showing people is that this was written in 50 to 60 AD. And what was going on in the culture at the time was that the Jews were fighting constantly with the Christians, and the Christians were starting to quarrel back. And so there was this tension, and it was a real threat to the growth of what the disciples were doing. So when Paul comes in and he starts talking in Romans 13, he's addressing a group of people that have been very hostile. And he's saying, look, you guys chill out. He's basically showing people the Jews have already been expelled. because of the conflict and being a threat to Rome. And the way of following Christ is that we are not to be a threat to political government, because we're not a part of that kingdom anymore. Our kingdom is not of this world. So we don't need to be debating and arguing and causing turmoil for the Roman government. We need to live a humble, quiet life, spreading the gospel amongst those who want to believe that Jesus was the Son of God and that he came. But we don't need to get kicked out of Rome, because that goes against what Jesus wanted us to do, which was to spread the gospel to as many places as we can. And it goes against the whole purpose.
Yeah.
So Paul right there is saying, you guys chill out, follow the government authorities, because there's chaos going on, and you have to understand that we have a mission here to spread the gospel. And
the government's here to keep order. Like
the government's here for good purpose, to keep order. Only a bad person is going to go to prison if you're doing wrong things. Now, later it became illegal to suffer Christianity. So what people have done is they've taken that scripture out of context, and they've said, okay, every person that is appointed by God in government is for God's purposes, and you need to submit to them and follow what they say without question, without discernment, without comparing what they're doing or saying to what Jesus actually taught. And that's not what Paul was communicating there. Yeah. Paul was speaking to a real church, or a real movement. It wasn't a church. It was a movement of people who were trying to grow, who were in their fragile stages. And he's telling them just advice. First and Second Corinthians. So this book was also written by Paul. It was written in 53 to 55 AD. And it was written to Corinth, Greece. So it was written to the people in Greece. And what you have to understand is that the people in Greece were very wealthy. They were very affluent. They had a lot of money. And so they were also
a port.
Yeah. It was a large trade center. And so they were also very immoral.
Yeah. There's so many different types of people coming in and out from different religious beliefs and backgrounds. So,
well, they were sexual. Like Greece was essentially driven culture.
Okay.
And there were like pagan shrines where they would have like sex gods and like all kinds of different things that was just a part of what their culture was.
Yeah.
So whenever the message of Christ came to Greece, Paul's writing to Corinthians, and a lot of the language he wrote to them was centered around like sexual immorality within the body. Okay.
Oh,
so
wow.
Paul's not.
Yeah, he's not talking to like all of Greece. God, dog.
I know, and so your religious political mind thinks that Paul's addressing the entire place of Greece.
No, that makes so. I mean, we've gone through this.
But in actuality, he's just addressing the small group of people that have converted to Christ.
Yeah.
Okay, and he's writing this letter to them, and he's saying, look, if you're having sex with your mother-in-law,
that's wrong.
That's not cool. And you don't see that language to any other book in the Bible where he talks like that. Because the culture in Greece was that was normal and that was okay. And he's saying that like, look, you guys are going to follow Jesus. You really can't be like living like this.
You can't do that.
Like, that's not cool. Your dad's not going to like that.
It's just not right.
So he's writing to real live actual issues inside a group of people. Okay. He's also writing to them about the misuse of spiritual gifts in this letter. Something that was very popular in the area of Greece when he wrote this letter to the Corinthians was that you could be very knowledgeable in a subject like
being able to recite your knowledge of what you knew, being able to rhetorically like say back what someone, I'm butchering it, being able to the word is rhetorical, that's the word it used, but being able to recite what someone has spoken before almost to the T was like they took pride in that, which is what we do in the church today, but just taking pride in the knowledge.
Yeah.
What you knew, the gods, and
So a lot in the book of Corinthians, they're teaching people because they started dividing speakers as I follow Paul, I follow Peter, and they were creating division in the body based on who they followed. And Paul addresses this and he says, hey, look, guys, don't follow Peter or Paul, follow Christ. That's who you follow.
Yeah.
Because the purpose isn't to, be following this certain person like an idol, but the purpose is to be united and that we're all one body.
Which is interesting because they had so many idols. And so it was just easy for them to recite and live that way.
It's unity, unity, unity. That's what Paul's speaking about in Corinthians. Now you look at today and you've got so many denominations, so many different speakers, so many different churches.
Oh God, yeah.
And if people just followed that book, we wouldn't have any of that. All right, next book is Galatians. Paul wrote Galatians. It was written in about 48 to 55 AD. And this book was written to Central Turkey. So Central Turkey was a Roman province, and it was primarily Jewish people. And Galatians addresses that the Jewish people are trying to take people back into the law. So it talks a lot about how they're asking people to be circumcised. They're asking people to observe certain days of the week as special holidays. Mm-hmm. They're counting righteousness as works based, as opposed to by faith.
Yeah, this whole book was about living by faith, huh?
Yeah. So he's addressing a Jewish group of people and he's teaching them that, hey, that stuff that you guys used to do underneath the law no longer applies. Christ is over the law and he has fulfilled all of those things.
Yeah.
Next book that we're going to look at is Ephesians. Ephesians was written by
Paul's disciple.
So Ephesians, it's questioned whether it was written by Paul or one of his disciples. We're not really sure, but it was written around 60 to 62 AD. It's kind of creeping close to the time where Paul was killed. So they're not really certain who wrote it. This was written to Ephesus, which was in Western Turkey. Is that what that says?
Yep, West Turkey.
Yep. So this was written over here in this area, Western Turkey. So Ephesians is very spiritual because the people in this region worshipped a god of fertility. It was a very spiritual area. There was a lot of magic and different things like that were going on. So this book is written to a group of people that are already opened up to the Spirit, but they're opened up to all the wrong things.
Yeah.
And
that's
so
interesting. They were close to Greece.
Right.
That's interesting.
So whenever Paul or one of his disciples writes this letter, he's writing to them in terms that they understand.
Yeah.
He's explaining your relationship with Christ as something with your spirit. He talks about we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, darkness. So there's a lot of that type of spiritual
analogies to where they could. Oh my God, that makes so much sense. I mean, when you look at it from this sort of context, and like these people are very spiritual, so they understand terms that are very spiritual in nature, very like artistic, like because that's their culture.
That's what Jesus did. Jesus wasn't a one size fits all. Jesus would mold and shape the message that he was trying to preach based on the type of people that he was speaking to.
Like when he spoke to the...
Just like if I write you a letter, it's going to be different than if I write Eden a letter, or I write like my grandfather a letter. It's, you're making the relationship personable, you know? And so these letters were personable letters to a certain area in the region.
This is where they talk about the armor of God and things like that. It just makes sense when you like say it like that. You
have a lot of flaky people that cling to Ephesians and try to make something out of it that it's really not. And then they dive off into like, you know, worshiping angels, and they don't say they're worshiping him, but they're looking for signs and manifestations and stuff. But in actuality, that book was just written to a group of people that were already doing that kind of stuff. And he's trying to show them Christ in a way that they would understand. Which is
Christ-like. It's very interesting. Corinthians and Ephesians are very much so like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the way they speak. Philippians.
So let's look at the book of Philippians. Philippians was written by Paul around 60 to 65 AD. This was written to northern Greece, so somewhere up here. And the issues that he's writing to these people are about status. They're getting caught up in like what your status is in the body, and again with those, you know, wealthy areas like Greece, their status in life really mattered to them a lot.
And like who you followed, and like
they're very politically minded because of the wealth. So he's trying to speak to them about humility.
This is also the book where he talks about I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But he's in prison, and he was talking about like whether I'm hungry, whether I'm poor, whether I have much, whether I'm full, I do it all through Christ.
Yeah.
And why wasn't he in prison when he wrote this? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Paul was in prison whenever he wrote Philippians. I see a lot of people like athletes and stuff like that, and they like, I can do all things through Christ. And that's not what he was talking about. He was talking about like being in prison, and you can be in prison and Christ will give you strength because you're in prison for the gospel.
And it was interesting.
It wasn't so you could dribble a basketball better.
It's just interesting that he uses that language, and he's like really honing in on the fact that he's weak right now.
Yeah, and honing in on his weakness was something that he was trying to do the Philippians, because they're these very affluent people that take a lot of pride in their strength.
Yeah.
And in their politics. And so he's saying, look at me, I'm in prison. But I'm strong.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to show them through his life modeled that strength isn't from political status. It's not from
anything external.
Yeah. It comes from obedience to Christ. All right, let's look at Colossians. Colossians is also disputed. It's either written by Paul or one of his disciples.
Really? Again, I just assume Paul has written everything in the New Testament.
You notice they don't put their signature on these letters, so we don't really know who exactly wrote them. They just assume who wrote them based on the style of the writing.
Sometimes in the beginning,
but they weren't putting their names on the books of the Bible so that they could get credit for them.
Paul wrote Book of Paul Part 2. No, it was just letters.
No, these were just letters. So this letter is written to Turkey. And Turkey, again, is one of those areas where they're very spiritual and stuff. So the threat here is that they are mixing religion with cosmic spiritual powers, and they're creating spiritual confusion for people. So Colossians,
I've been there.
he's writing because they're taking like all these spiritual things and like these goddesses and stuff like that. They're mixing them with Christ, and really overcomplicating what the message of Christ was. So Colossians, a lot of it is just, hey, Christ is enough. You don't need to add stuff to it. Just the simplicity of Christ and him crucified is satisfactory.
Yeah. You don't need to add any extra things to it. That makes sense.
So the last Thessalonians.
I was trying to say it like that too.
Thessalonians 1 and 2 is Paul, and Paul is writing this around 50 AD, which is actually a lot earlier than most of the other letters.
Yeah.
That's something cool that I didn't know, is that Thessalonians 1 and 2 was actually one of the first letters written, even before the Gospels were written.
That's what I was. So Acts and Thessalonians were around the same time, possibly.
That's when they were written, yeah.
That's interesting.
And it's written to Macedonia, which is in Greece. And this one's talking a lot about suffering and grief and the early church after Christ's death, because the hostility was really heightened at this period right after Christ was crucified. So a lot of people were being martyred and killed.
Yeah. This also talked about the coming of Christ.
Yeah, and so what's happening is that a lot of people are being killed, and they're getting discouraged because Christ said that he was going to return. And so they're losing, like...
They're thinking it was much quicker.
They're thinking that it's going to happen much quicker, and they're losing their faith and getting discouraged. So Paul's writing this letter to them and saying, hey, like, continue to fight, continue to stand in faith despite the persecution. He's reminding them that Christ is going to return, and to have faith in that. And then you also had a lot of people that were being lazy in these books. They were just choosing not to work because they were so close to when Jesus was alive and believing that he was going to come back very soon. So he's also writing to a lot of people and saying, hey, take up your normal jobs and work, and don't like neglect the day-to-day things that you ought to be doing just because you believe, Christ is coming soon.
Yeah.
I think this is when he writes, like, one will be in the field, one will be.
Yeah.
Like, he's telling, is that true in Thessalonians?
Yeah, I think I can sort of read French.
So he's telling them that Christ is going to come while you're just doing your normal.
Return of Christ, 2 Thessalonians 2.
Yeah, so he's explained to them Christ is going to come when you're just doing your normal day-to-day routine. And I've heard a lot of preachers preach on this and being like, listen, guys, one of you is going to be out in the field, the other one's going to be, in your house, and they're going to be taken. And, that's not what he's communicating here. He's communicating to a real group of people that are really hurting and being killed. And he's telling them, like, look, Christ is going to come. It's just going to look more like your normal day-to-day life. So continue on. Don't just like stop working and stop everything and just wait for Christ. Like, continue with your normal life.
This is where the rapture theology comes in.
Yeah. A lot of people create theology out of that book.